project went, and we'll do some tips to maybe help you guys out on your projects. So here's just kind of an overview of the talk. Start with just an introduction of who am I. Then I'll go into just kind of an overview of Grapplers Relic Rivals, the design, the project goals, and the development, just so that we're kind of all on the same page of what we're talking about here. I'll talk about some lessons that I learned. I have a background in AAA, and so some things that I learned making an indie game and how that's different. I'll go over some Grapplers Relic Rivals, just kind of like news coverage and sales data and some challenges that the project hit along the way. And then also I'll go over some lessons that I learned working in AAA that might also apply to indie games and indie projects. Then we can have some time for Q&A at the end. So here I am, Paul Kankiewicz again. I was a technical and mission designer. I worked at BioWare, Monolith, and Avalanche. I am now an indie game dev. I started an indie game studio last year when I left AAA. I went to DigiPen and graduated in 2011 with a programming degree. And I also have a QA background at Monolith Games, Microsoft, and Foundation 9 Entertainment, which I don't think is even around anymore, but worked there for a bit. And basically I have a very good depth of, or breadth of different disciplines in the industry. I also have more than 30 years of gaming experience, so basically I'm open. These are some of the games that I worked on the design side. So Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, both of those DLCs. I worked on a lot of the main and side missions of the game. And I also worked on some things like collectibles. And then I worked on Hogwarts Legacy when Monolith kind of worked with Avalanche Software to sort of like help out the game during its development. And then I moved to BioWare, where I worked at Dragon Age Dreadwolf. Worked as a technical designer there, where I worked on a lot of the sort of objects that the player interacts with, whether it was a lever, an elevator, or a cool arcane thing that the player explodes. I also worked, as I mentioned, in QA. So these are some of the games that I worked on in QA. But we're here today to talk about Grapplers Relic Rivals, obviously. So this is just kind of a screenshot of the game, so you can kind of get an idea. It's a very Towerfall Ascension-y type game, also similar to Smash Bros. If you haven't played Towerfall. So Grapplers Relic Rivals is an insanely chaotic PvP platformer with grappling hooks. It was released in June of this year, and it was made in Game Maker Studio. And so, again, just so that we're on the same page, I'll go over some of the design features of the game. So the main objective of the game is to collect coins that spawn randomly throughout the stages. Also, periodically throughout the game, throughout the matches, chests will spawn that contain powerful relics. These relics can do greatly different things. So there are like defensive relics, like the bubble shield that will, when you get hit, it'll pop, it'll soak the damage for you, and then it'll reform after a bit. There are also offensive relics, like a flame wreath that'll surround you and as you move into enemy. Players, so you have to kind of be careful when you stole a relic from somebody. You could damage enemies in multiple different ways. Jumping on them was the main way, but you could also, if you hit them with the grappling hook when they didn't have a relic, you would deal damage to them. And then, as I mentioned, there were various relics that dealt damage, just they were offensive relics that did that. So, for example, like you might spawn a plant turret that would shoot at your enemies. There are also traps that were placed throughout each level. So these would be things like spike traps that would constantly activate and deactivate, or swinging axe traps, or turrets that would constantly shoot at the nearest enemy. And then if you died, you would respawn at your sarcophagus after like 10 seconds or so, because I don't like games where players are completely taken out of the game. So this allowed players to constantly be engaged, constantly care about what's going on in the game, and for there to never be like a clear winner. I didn't mention this on this slide, but also when you defeated an enemy, they would explode into a coin explosion of coins. So that would kind of create a design of having the players constantly going after the player that's in the lead to create the biggest explosion of coins and kind of even the odds. I had a few goals that I set at the start of the project. I find this to be extremely important when you're starting a project to actually have some sort of goal in mind, whether that's I care about actually like, sales for a lot of people, or this can be things like I'm trying to learn something, or maybe you just have an idea for a game that this is your hobby game and you're just trying to put some cool art out into the world. So some goals for Grapplers Relic Rivals. I found a lot of information online that was like, hey, it's really important when starting a game to start very small. Now, I had a AAA background. I had done lots of programming and QA and design and stuff, but even moving into the indie space, that's different than, say, working on a AAA team where you have a basically unlimited budget and tons of people. So I knew that I wanted to start small on this game. My intention for making this game was to learn everything that I needed to make my next much bigger game succeed. So I knew I wanted to make this really big, like 2+ year long game, but I didn't want to start there because there were so many things that I didn't know about the indie space, like marketing and working with streamers and that sort of thing, that I wanted to learn before I spent all the time basically fail often, right? I wanted to start on a small project that if I had completely messed up, it's like, whatever, that was just a small thing. So kind of with the start small thing, I wanted to ship a game in about 6 months, which was extremely ambitious, and I knew this going into it. So I knew that it was okay if that kind of slid a little bit, but I wanted to basically only spend a small amount of time creating this first game and learning everything that I could. I also knew that I wanted to work with an artist and a sound designer. Again, I had worked with different aspects of different like artists and such in the AAA space, but finding an artist and a sound designer and then working with them in the indie space is very different than having like producers and everyone working in the AAA space. I started with the idea of, hey, I'm going to make this game with a $4,000 budget. Turns out after looking into like how much artists and sound designers cost to contract, that ended up being a very unrealistic goal. So I very quickly changed that to, okay, let's figure out what will work for a budget there. And $10,000 seemed about within the right range for me for a goal there. And very importantly, I had no sales expectations. So I knew going into this, if this game didn't sell at all, that was totally fine. My intent, again, was to learn anything that I could that would then help my next bigger game succeed. So I'm going to go into how the game kind of came about. So it started in 2014, 2016, somewhere around there. A friend of mine constantly had friends over, and we would play all sorts of different party games. So games like Towerfall Ascension, Spider Heck, Ultimate Chicken Horse, Smash Bros, Johann Sebastian Joust, all these different party games, and it was a blast. And so I wanted to create a game that sort of paid homage to those times that we had together. I knew that I wanted to make a platformer. I love platformers, play tons of them, but I know that lots of people don't necessarily enjoy playing platformers, or they find them very frustrating. So I decided, okay, what if I added a grappling hook that would allow the player to just point in a direction and then go there? So that sort of came about to help with accessibility. And then as I playtested the game, as I mentioned, like players wanted to be able to do something more with that grappling hook. So I added various interactions, such as when you hit a player, you can steal a relic. The grappling hook will also block projectiles and other players' grapplers, so you can use that as like a defense mechanism mechanic. And then you can also activate certain traps with the grappling hook, cause those traps to then hit other players. And so basically, as I play tested, I found that there were different interactions that players wanted with the grappling hook. I then knew going into it that because I wanted to make a game similar to Ultimate Chicken Horse, that I wanted various traps that I added around the different levels. So I started kind of brainstorming the different traps, adding them around the levels, and that then made the levels feel very unique because depending on which traps were in a level, it would play very differently. After a little bit of playtesting, I noticed that players would mainly just sort of stay in one location, kind of jump on each other, then one would die, and then they'd go back and respawn in their sarcophagus, and it would just become this really very much like clumps of small combats, and that wasn't really what I wanted for the game. I wanted players actually moving around the level, interacting with each other and the traps and stuff like that. So I ended up adding coins as the victory condition to get players moving around the level, and that worked super well. As soon as I added that, I saw players actually, like they would fight for a little bit, and then they'd realize, oh, we're actually trying to get coins to win, so that would get them moving around the level, which would then get them interacting with the traps and the relics and everything like that. Then I added chests and relics, which would also make them move around even more, because it's like, oh, there's now a power-up over there. Okay, I can get that. That's very important. And then they'd start like grabbing them from each other. And if you like hit a relic while it's like cancel somebody's grappler while they're stealing a relic, that relic will just sort of hang there. And so again, it would be things that would start getting players to move around the level. And then I did like it's not the show and tell, but one of the Seattle Indies events where we just kind of talk about the game design and ask for ideas. And Paxton actually said, hey, what if you had this like character select tutorial where players sort of learn the mechanics so that you didn't have to learn those mechanics while you're like in the heat of battle, that sort of thing. And that was a brilliant idea. I had also played a game called Duck Game where they did a very similar thing. So I added this character select tutorial, which is the image on the screen, where players can sort of learn the main mechanics of the game. It has like walls that you can grapple onto. It has the non-grappleable surfaces, which are those metal things. It has like coins that you can get, but you can only get those if you do the grapple, like you hold onto a wall, grapple, and then jump from there, which is a mechanic in the game that players just weren't getting. But doing this allowed players to actually learn that in a much safer environment where they could kind of explore with the different mechanics. And so now I can go into the different lessons that I learned while developing this game. Lesson one is doing market research. So, you've heard of it before, but I always was like, market research, whatever, I'll just make a good game. That'll be fine. If I make a good enough game, players will flock to it and everything will be fine, right? No, that's wrong. So first of all, before starting your project, it's important to think of what sort of games will sell well. And so definitely doing that research and looking into the types of genres or the sizes of the games or the mechanics of the games that people are playing. And also having a sort of target audience in mind really helps to get your project. It basically does the marketing for you if you have something that people already want. But I also find it important to temper this with your expertise and interests. So like, I'm not a big fan of 4K games, but 4K games apparently sell really well. But if I were making a 4K game, I just wouldn't be able to do it justice. I wouldn't be interested in it. I'd probably hit burnout, that sort of thing. And so that's really not a good fit for me specifically. So definitely when you're doing your market research, think about what sort of things you want to make, what sort of games you've played, what sort of games you enjoy, and try to make something in that vein. I'm definitely not the person to ask about market research. I don't know a lot about this sort of marketing like strategies and that sort of thing. But how to market a game is the #1 resource that I've heard tons of indie people mention. So I highly suggest looking into that. I think it's just one guy that like kind of puts out videos and blog posts and stuff like that on various marketing things. He does some really deep dives into the data. He digs through Steam's stuff. And I think every either year or quarter, he puts out lots of information on like, here are the games that are now like people are flocking to. So definitely look into that. And then SteamDB is a site that will just let you dig through tons of information on Steam and what players are playing right now. And then also certain genres, like similar to how certain genres do really well, certain genres also do pretty poorly. So for example, I made a 2D platformer, local multiplayer PvP game, and like any one of those things is not the game to make. So definitely, again, do this research before you start your project, and tailor those also to your project goals, right? If you're interested in making money, then this is really important. If you're just making a game to make a game, doesn't matter so much, right? Lesson #2 is contact press and streamers early. I thought that you could just kind of make a game and then like maybe a week before you release, send it to a couple streamers and they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just sitting here waiting to play a game. Yeah, of course, awesome, I can play your game. Yeah, again, not true at all. They're super busy people. They often don't respond because they're so busy and they have other things that they're doing. So definitely do your research. Look into streamers that fit your game because there are certain streamers that are like, I only like RPG games, for example. And definitely contact them, I would say like 1 to 2 months before your big updates. So things like, and this will depend on your milestone and your project and all that, but alpha and beta, your demo release, launching obviously, and then even major updates that you have after launch, you can still contact those streamers and be like, hey, I'm going to be releasing a single player mode for my game. Would you like to check this out? Sometimes they'll be like, hell yeah, I'll check that out. And especially if they've already covered your game before, I feel like that's a sort of more incentive to have them cover it again. When you send out these emails to streamers, just include a Steam key. It costs you nothing. You can just generate Steam keys for free on Steam. And it basically reduces the friction to them actually covering your game. If they don't have to ping you back and say, hey, could I have yes, I'd like a key or something like that. And also sometimes they'll just have those emails sitting in their inbox. They'll hit a downtime where they don't have things to cover, and then they'll go back through those. And if they already have the Steam key, they can just play it and cover your game. And I also really encourage you to ping them again if you don't get a response. Again, they're very busy. Sometimes they just don't see your email. This happened with me where I pinged Stumped, which I'll talk about later, and they didn't respond initially. Then I pinged them again after, don't be annoying. I pinged them again after like a couple weeks or a month or something like that. And then they did end up actually covering the game. So you can actually use this to get more responses than without messaging them again. And maybe they just, again, didn't have time that first time. #3, choose a target resolution early. So this is something like I knew about resolution. I knew that it was important. I knew that there were different resolutions and different aspect ratios and all that sort of stuff. But I didn't know that you had to have a specific like target resolution in mind when you're creating your art and when you're sort of like upscaling your game window. And it's super, super important. So this resolution needs to divide evenly into common screen resolutions. So some of the more common ones are like 640 by 360 or 480 by 270, which then scale up into like 1920 by 1080. And you also have to maintain the aspect ratio. So for example, 16 by 9 or 4 by 3, depending on what you're targeting. I think also ultra wides are a little different. So definitely look into that. And if you don't have this, like I did, you need to redo all your in-game values. So this is things like move speed, tile size, like grapple length, for example, for me, gravity, all these things have to be readjusted if you then have to like retrofit a target resolution into that, which is something that I had to do. And this took a lot of effort and time. I was very fortunate, again, that I started on a very small project, because if I had done this, if I had gone 2 years and then gotten real art to replace my temp art, that would have been so much more work than on this just 6-month or 8-month game that I made. Lesson number 4, make your launch day the biggest that you can. So I think this is pretty obvious. People know this, but I can go into some details that maybe you didn't know. So for example, Steam has this popular upcoming list. As far as I could tell, so Steam algorithm is pretty complex and very arcane, and people just kind of, I think, they do a lot of research, but they also kind of guess a lot on this. But from the best that I could tell, basically the popular upcoming is based on wishlist amounts, and it's based on the number of wishlists that each game has on the launch day. So the general idea is that you want 7,000 to 10,000 wishlists before you launch your game to actually hit this page. That can be a little variable. Again, if nothing's coming out on that day, nothing major anyway, you'll have a higher chance of hitting this. So that's why everybody says, you want to maybe change your launch date if something big is coming out on your same day. Obviously, you want to have a launch trailer. You want to do social media posts, especially leading up to your game so that people know about it. And then even once you launch, you want to continue that to make sure that people know about it. I've always heard that if you're doing marketing and you don't feel like you're being annoying, you're doing marketing wrong. So definitely make sure to constantly, especially around your launch, to tell people and make sure to get the word out. You want to get 10 reviews as soon as possible. So I didn't know this going into it, but when you release a game on Steam that doesn't have 10 reviews, or until the game gets 10 reviews, it's more or less invisible on Steam. So people can get to it directly. They can, if they know the name of your game, like if it's your friend, they can go to it, they can find it, everything's fine. But Steam doesn't actually show your game to other people until it gets 10 reviews. So definitely, talk to friends, talk to family members, get them to write those reviews, because those first 10 reviews are extremely important. In my research, I found, if I'm not mistaken, reviews for keys that are given out for free, I don't think count. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So this has to be people that actually buy the game. And also, it's tough to recover from a bad launch. Again, this goes into Steam algorithms being a little complex and arcane, but from what I understand, if a game doesn't do well, Steam sort of learns that, and it's a lot harder than to make progress later. It is possible, but it's definitely going to take a lot of effort on your part, a lot of updates, a lot of bug fixes, a lot of people actually showing interest. Lesson 5 is that launching is not the finish line. So I expected, hey, I'm going to launch the game, and then I'm going to actually be able to take a break after this big, long push that I did, and that's not true. So after you launch the game, you're going to be doing things like bug fixes. There was a quote that, or a thing that a friend in QA once told me that was, you can spend, even in AAA space, when you spend multiple years making this game, and you've had like 30 or 40 QA testers, or maybe even more, working on the game, on the first day of your game being released, there will be more hours put into that game than you've done in that multiple years with all the QA testers that you had, just because, if you have like 1 million people playing it, that's a whole lot of hours. So they will find bugs that you never even thought of. They'll be also testing on so many different machines than you've been testing, even if you've been trying to actually test on multiple different machines. You're also going to be doing game updates. In theory, you have some sort of plan or roadmap for how to keep this game going, how to update it, different things that you want added to the game. You'll get lots of player feedback. So whether that's through reviews or people contacting you, or maybe you have a Discord where people can send you feedback. All these different places, people will be sending you things and you'll be like, oh, that sounds great. I want to add that to the game. That's going to take time and effort to add that. Also, marketing is a full-time job. It takes a lot of work to actually market a game, whether that's social media posts or even just like creating ads. That's going to take your time and effort. Short-form content is absolutely the most watched and interacted with things in my experience and for things that I've seen with other people. So places like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels. I'm pretty sure that my lowest views short content got more views than my highest view long content. So it's really important to be on these different platforms if you want to market your own game. So going back to Grapplers Relic Rivals, these are some things that I tried to do post-launch to sort of improve the game after I had launched. I created new levels, new traps, different relics, because these were some things that players had said that they wanted. I think that after between now and launch, I think I like doubled the number of levels that I had in the game. I added achievements. Now, this is definitely something that I should have added before launch, but I had never done this before. I didn't have time. It just sort of fell off. And again, I was working on a very rapid timeline, but I added those achievements up there. I added what I call game changer options. So these are options that change the game. These are things like exploding corpses, having players start with relics so that it just sort of accelerated the gameplay. They could change movement speed either up or down. They could adjust gravity either up or down, and various options like that. I added a single player mode because that was one of the most requested changes to the game. People I went into this thinking, oh, I'll make a multiplayer game and everyone will love it and it'll be great. And people immediately went, I want to play this by myself. Like, I don't have friends to constantly bring over. So I just want something that I can play here. So I added that. I added some different speedrun challenge modes that they could play. I added a demo, which once again, that's something you should definitely have before you launch your game. That's an important marketing beat that you should have. And that also allows streamers to then pick it up and say, is this a game that I even want to stream for players? I've heard that a lot of streamers are they're not interested in playing a game until they know that it's something that the people that they stream for will like. So having a demo is very important. And then I also added various bug fixes and tuning, again, going back to the fact that you'll have more players playing your game after launch than during development. You'll have lots of ideas for different things that need to be fixed. And then Grapplers Relic Rivals, as I kind of mentioned before, was streamed by Stumped, which is a group of people that get together and play local multiplayer games. So again, they were one that I did some research and I was like, oh, lots of local multiplayer games are streamed by them. So they are definitely a great fit for me to reach out to. I reached out to them. They didn't message me, but then after, I don't know, 2 weeks or a month or something like that, I messaged them again and they're like, oh, shoot, we forgot to respond. Yeah, sure, we'll totally stream your game. So that was really awesome to see them play the game and get some feedback there. I did a Reddit AMA, which was basically I was like, hey, I'm a AAA game dev. I'm releasing my first indie game. Ask me anything. And got 18,000 views, which for me, that was like insane. I was like, holy cow, people are actually engaging with this. This is great. I'm able to like help people with indie dev and such, which was wonderful. I showed the game at Seattle Indies Expo. Thanks, everybody. We had basically a full booth the whole entire time. It was wonderful seeing people constantly playing the game. We had just released the single player mode there. So we had one booth or one screen that was constantly playing local multiplayer matches, and then another one where they were actually able to do those challenge modes, and I got to get feedback from them. And honestly, I probably made it a little bit too difficult because people had a tough time with that. But then I went to go back and I got to go back and make those updates and update those levels so they were a little easier. And then I had some articles written by like Hard Drive and indiegames.eu, which was pretty cool to see people actually like writing professional reviews for my indie game. And so all of this I wanted to mention to kind of get to sales and talk about that. So even with all of that, Grapplers Relic Rivals was not a financial success. It was a super quick game that also, again, I didn't do the marketing research to find a game that people actually wanted to play to start off. Local multiplayer games, I think, are mostly a dead genre, you know, with online multiplayer now, and we're post-pandemic, so people don't necessarily want to get together to play with people to play games so much. There was a weekend after launch where I did a Steam update round, which, if you don't know, is a way to like get increased visibility on Steam for about a month. I did a major update, which is the single player mode. I showed the game at Seattle Indies Expo, and I did a 20% sale, and there was just nothing. It just seemed, again, kind of like that. It's hard to recover from a bad launch thing that Steam just didn't want to, the Steam algorithm didn't want to actually push the game to people. But again, my goal for this game was not to sell millions of copies of this game. My goal was to learn things along the way. And so if you ask me, was Grapplers Relic Rivals a success? I think so, because I learned tons of stuff along the way, and I did it in a much shorter time period than I might have otherwise. And I also did it on a much smaller game so that when I failed, it wasn't as bad. And I'm a big believer that a shipped game is infinitely better than a canceled one. So I actually was able to release this game and learn things along the way, and that was great. I've kind of been talking about this as I've been going, but I want to go into some of the challenges or maybe reasons why Grapplers Relic Rivals didn't do as well as it should have or could have. So it was an eight-month dev cycle. That means that from the start of when I started doing any code to somebody actually till when the game released, there's only 8 months for somebody to actually discover this game, and that's not a lot of time, right? It was local multiplayer only, which, as I've mentioned, players just don't seem to want as much as, say, a single-player game or a more story-driven game or an online multiplayer game. This was a challenge along the way, but the resolution change that I had mentioned, not having a target resolution in mind, meant that I spent a lot of time just fixing like every single number in my game and updating it to the correct resolution. There was a very difficult audio bug that I had that took, again, like maybe 2 weeks or so, which when you're only working on an 8-month timeline is pretty significant. Long story short, it ended up being some sort of like engine value in GameMaker that just quite didn't work, and it constantly basically would, or randomly would spike the audio level. I ended up actually tracking that down because I sent a message to the GameMaker Discord, and one of the GameMaker devs actually was able to download my project. Like I sent him my project, he downloaded it, got an old version of GameMaker because that's what I was working on, and debugged it using like actual GameMaker tools, which is pretty cool to work with him to do that. My artist and sound designer were amazing, but again, working on a like 6 to 8 month deadline for the whole project meant that my artist and sound designer only had like 2 months or so to do their work, and that's not a lot of time, right? So this was a very accelerated loop, a very accelerated timeline, and it meant that I didn't have time to do the iteration loops that you would have wanted on a normal project. Marketing is not something that I'm good at. It's definitely something that I'm learning. And again, things like short form content is definitely the way to go nowadays. But I didn't do enough of that as I was developing the game. And again, when it's only a 6 to 8 month timeline, that's not a lot of time for somebody to discover your game. And once again, it's very hard to recover from a failed launch. So that goes back into one of the lessons, which was make sure that you make as big of a launch as you can. And also one of the things that I didn't mention there was, if possible, release on multiple platforms at the same time, because that'll help elevate your launch. So I'm going to go through just a few quick lessons that I learned in AAA that might be able to help you when making your indie game. Prototype. So similar to the lesson of, or the starting on a short project, it's important to do rapid prototyping for various systems and mechanics and whatever you're doing. You can, if you need to, you can then also playtest those prototypes with people, which is very helpful to get feedback, which is going to be another one of these lessons, but that'll help you sort of iterate in a very, very quick loop that will then help make the end product a lot better. Brainstorm. Anytime I was stuck on an idea, brainstorming helped me a ton. So I always just, when I brainstorm, I just spit out as many ideas as I can. I write them all down, or I type them up or whatever, and don't turn down any ideas at this stage. So definitely just write down everything that comes to your mind. And then after you've done that and kind of exhausted all your options, go back through them and sort of prioritize which ones might not be feasible or which ones might be better ideas than other ideas. And this is just a way that a thing that I use to kind of unstick myself sometimes when I'm chewing on a problem that I can't quite figure out. Iterate, iterate, iterate. I'm sure you've heard it a million times, but any artistic endeavor or making games or whatever will benefit from more iteration loops, because you try something out, you get some feedback, you learn something, you then iterate and make it better. And the more times that you can do this for any game or system or art piece, the better it'll be. Prioritization, this is definitely a skill that I feel you have to kind of build up. But one tool that I use while prioritizing what to work on for my game is to ask myself, if the game were to fail to ship today, what would be the reason? And then what can I do to sort of prevent that or stop that? So at the beginning of your game, it'll be very simple things. It'll be like, my game doesn't have input, or my game doesn't have a character, or my game doesn't have a camera. But as you start going along with the project, you'll get into some deeper things like, I don't have a medium-sized game loop, or this sort of system isn't really fun and engaging, and I should try to do some things to elevate that. And so you'll start getting into, oh, okay, that's actually the problem that people are having with my game, and then you can work on things to make that better. Get playtest very often and very early, like probably way earlier than you think, and get feedback from people, because you kind of have to work with them to actually dig into their feedback a lot of times, because some people will just be like, oh, that's a fun, whatever, okay. But you have to like really get into like, no, what would you change? What did you find engaging so that I can keep that or work on that some more? And so you definitely have to like dig into that a little bit more, but players will actually, I found, open up to you and say like, here's actually what I think would be good for your game. And they come up with some very good, clever ideas. So definitely listen to people and dig into their feedback. There's also a story, so let me go to here. And then also, when people give you feedback, don't take it personally. Use it as a way to improve your craft or your game or your art or whatever they're giving feedback on. It's something that you really have to learn, but develop that thick skin and really use their feedback as a way to improve rather than taking it personally. Similar to the whole feedback thing, there's a story of a friend who worked at, I think it was 343 on a Halo game, and there was a designer that got some feedback that like a rocket launcher just wasn't feeling powerful. They had done some play testing, and people were saying, yeah, we don't want to use this. It's not powerful enough. And he kind of dug into the numbers. He looked into it, and he's like, well, it's mathematically, it is balanced. It's fine. And so he started digging into that feedback and thinking about like, oh, what can I do to make it better? And it turns out he was able to just give it a better sound effect. And then players actually started using it and liking it and thinking that it felt good. So when somebody gives you feedback, again, really dig into like what you can do to improve that and what their feedback is actually about, not necessarily just taking it at face value. Communication is extremely important in any sort of team-based environment. So especially games where you're working with artists or sound designers or programmers or designers, whatever it is, definitely work on communication. It is extremely important, especially cross-disciplinary communication. This is something you definitely have to build up, but you can sort of speak somebody else's language. That'll help a lot to kind of see where they're coming from, see what sort of challenges they have to face, and then be able to talk to them about the game or the piece of thing that you're working on. And then this is sort of my hack for creativity. If you're getting stuck on something and you're trying to be creative, just smush two things together. A plus B equals C. Taking two things and then just smushing them together, everyone, like, when you do that, people will see that as like, oh, wow, you've created this cool new thing, but all you've done is just taken two things. And so again, when I get stuck on creativity, that's definitely where I go to. So yeah, that's my talk on the things I learned while working on Grapplers Relic Rivals. There's my email and my link tree, which has all my different like social information if you'd like that. Feel free to message me anytime or email me anytime. I'm always down to talk about games and game design. And if you're stuck on something, just message me and I'll help out. Now we can go into, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask and I'll try to answer as best I can.
I was wondering, what made you decide to do Game Maker?
Yeah, good question. So I had used Game Maker before for some very quick, rapid prototyping things. And Game Maker is the engine that, for me, just like gets out of your way and allows you to make your stuff. I had used like Unity and Unreal, and I looked into them, and I've even looked into them for my second project. But they're just, to me, they're very clunky. They do everything when you don't necessarily need everything. And Game Maker was just super streamlined to me. Game Maker does only do 2D games, so that is kind of a limitation. If you're going to work in 3D, you can't use Game Maker. But yeah, it was just very simple to use, simple to learn. There's a lot of good, like, they have a Game Maker community and a Game Maker Discord if you get stuck, and lots of tutorials out there for it. So it just worked for me.
You said that you got a pretty good team. How did you find the people you worked with?
Oh yeah, so my sound designer was actually from Seattle Indies. He reached out to me after I had kind of said that I put out a video of like, hey, I'm looking for a sound designer. And so yeah, I talked to him and we just kind of hit it off. And so I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll work with him for sound design. For an artist though, I had pinged a whole bunch of places like the Game Maker community forum, Reddit at a few places. I think I like posted something on my website looking for an artist. And that actually was a bit of a big process. So actually, I think I got something like 50 or 100 applicants, kind of narrowed it down based on just sending a few emails and asking a few questions to about like 10 people or so. And then I did interviews, just like 30-minute to 1 hour interviews, mostly just getting vibes and kind of asking them some more technical art questions, and landed on one person that I just really, really liked. He had really great skills. He knew a lot of the technical aspects. So especially when I was talking about like the target resolution and stuff, he was able to like immediately help me with that question. And I just knew that he would be good to work with. And I was right. He was amazing. Huh?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm wondering about when you reach out to streamers. I know a lot of them, at least some of the bigger ones, will have fees and they want compensation for playing your game. How do you handle that? Do you just stick to smaller streamers? how do you handle that side of it?
Yeah, so I think that would obviously very much depend on your project's budget. If for a simple game like this, on my super quick timeline and super small budget, yeah, there's no way that I would be like, yeah, I'm going to pay a streamer to do this. But for my next game, that's definitely something that I'm going to look into. And it's really, I haven't done any paid streamer work, so I don't know exactly how that works. I'll have to look into that. But I'd suggest if you're working on a smaller game, yeah, stick to streamers that will just kind of cover anything, or that say that they like indie games. But if that fits your project's budget, then that's a thing that you can do. I would definitely, do some research and look into like what you get basically for that cost. Because again, I'm not sure how that works or what sort of return you'll make on that.
Along those same lines, we had a question on Twitch. Did you reach out to Hard Drive and the other website that covered your game, and if not, how did they become aware of your game to review it?
Hard Drive, I actually don't remember. I think that I reached out to them. It's possible that they just sent me an email. I probably reached out to them, but I'm not 100% sure. And then, or no, I'm sorry, I'm mixing these up. That was indiegames.eu. I think they just either reached out to me or I reached out to them. I'm not sure. But the Hard Drive one was actually through Seattle Indies Discord. I knew that I was going to be going to Seattle Indies Expo, and I saw him post on the Seattle Indies Discord of like, hey, I'm looking to cover some games that are going to be at 6. If anybody's interested, ping me. And so I pinged him, and he was like, yeah, sure, he talked to because again, my game's a local multiplayer game, so he had to set something up, which took a little bit, but then he was able to play the game with some of them, and he wrote up an article for that.
How specifically did you do your market research? Like, what led you to the conclusions that specific genres would do better than others?
A lot of Googling, found the how to market a game sort of thing. He goes into, again, a lot of the data of Steam sales and Steam DB. So he really digs into the data, and then he'll list different, here are the genres that are have various number of sales. He also filters out ones with no reviews or very low reviews. And then I think he also does a separate one that's these are games that have gotten at least 1,000 reviews. So again, he really breaks it down into some very good data-driven ideas. But a lot of it, even separate from that, just doing a lot of Googling, a lot of research, and looking into what people have said.
So you mentioned one of your goals was no sales, and then you talked a lot about marketing. What made you want to do marketing? Cool.
Because at that point I had spent 6 to 8 months making this game, and so I might as well have spent some time trying to market the game. So even though I had a goal of I don't care about sales expectations, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't if a million people were like, I'm going to pay you to make this game, I wouldn't say no. I'd be like, oh, cool, thanks. Thanks for giving me money for my next game, right? So I wanted to try. And then also because I know that my next game, I want to make money, I had to do some amount of that to learn the process again. That was the goal for this one, is learn, kind of everything, but how to market a game, how to contact streamers, how to work with the press, that sort of thing. So I definitely had to at least give that some amount of try on this game.
How'd you work out the legal details between your sound designer and your artist? Did you just have a informal Discord agreement, or did you write a contract that explained this is what we'll do with our money?
Yeah. So again, especially because this game was so small and such a small timeline and such a small budget, I wasn't too worried about legal concerns and that sort of thing. So I did just go online and find a sort of boilerplate contract that I edited a little, and went over that with them on a call, which I felt was very important. Of like, here are the things that I think this legal or that I've written this legal document to mean, and made sure that we were on the same page. Because once again, communication is extremely important. But also at the end of the day, I knew like, even if something really bad happened, I wasn't going to do anything about it for such a small game, and I knew that it wasn't going to matter. I would highly suggest, if you're actually working on like a big game that you want to sell well, that sort of thing, that you talk to a lawyer, that you get them to write up the contract, because yeah, what I did probably would not hold water in a court, that sort of thing. So definitely look into that if you are making a much bigger indie game.
Thanks for sharing the variable your experience. I have two questions. My first question is, I'm wondering there was a strategic factor for your game's price. What was your thought behind the price? That's my first question. And secondly, you mentioned your game had bad release. Maybe I missed, but I wonder what was the reason, and if you improve it, and what would you do that?
Sorry, can you repeat the second question? I didn't quite catch that.
So you had a bad release. Your game has a bad release. And I was wondering what was the main reason, and what would you do that if you could fix it?
Yeah, gotcha. So for the price of my game, I looked into other similar games and how much they were priced, and then I think I probably did a little tweaking of like, maybe a different game was $20, but they were a lot bigger than me. Okay, I can't charge $20 for my game. Kind of figured that out. And this is not like my area of expertise, but I definitely knew that, a lot of people buy Steam games on sale. So I pushed the price maybe a little higher than I possibly should have, because I was like, okay, well, it's going to be discounted 20% or 30% or something, and kind of adjusted for that. And then, most of this whole talk was about the release and things that I learned to kind of change that. But the gist was, the genre is not something that I think is super appealing to people nowadays, because it's a 2D platformer, it's PvP, it's local multiplayer. I didn't add the single player until afterwards. It's also a much smaller game than I think a lot of people are willing to play in that same space, because there's like Smash Bros with like, hey, we've got 200 levels or whatever. And I think also, I think it's Rivals of Ether or something like that. There's like a free-to-play one that's like, somebody had mentioned on like Reddit or something like, why would somebody play your game when they have to pay when there's like this game for free? And yeah, I'm not sure how that exactly ties into things, or like how you can beat free, right? So I would do that differently. Again, contacting streamers a lot earlier than I did. I think that really hurt me. And yeah, again, just basically a lot of the points that I went over in the presentation.
One more question.
I already have. Yeah, so aside from prototyping and iterating, what helped you figure out how to decide on the nitty-gritty details of the core gameplay mechanics, like say move speed, grapple speed, how fast you move when grappled, like frequency of all the relic drops, etc.
Right, yeah, good question. I don't know if the mic quite picked it up, so I'll just repeat it, which is like, how did I find all the fine details of the game of like move speed and grapple speed and chest spawn rate and that sort of thing? Honestly, it was a lot of playtesting and iteration, but at the same time, I have a background in AAA game design and technical design. And so even separate from this game, I've listened to players' feedback on lots of things, watched various playtests at a AAA level, kind of gotten a lot of that information is just sort of second nature to me. So, but my process was basically start with something that I think feels good, play test it, watch people play it, and see, like, if I watch a match and they finish the match and only one relic spawns, clearly I need to make that happen more often. So a lot of it is just game feel, basically, and my previous experience through doing this. And really, for somebody that doesn't have that, it's just do that playtesting and iteration and do it constantly, and you'll eventually sort of build up the knowledge of kind of how to do that as you go along.